Are we ready? Brendan, are we ready? And welcome. Thank you very much for taking the time to spend with us. And you're out in Dubai at the moment. I take it the weather's nice. Ours is a bit chilly over here. How is it over there?
Well, chilly is a relative definition in Dubai terms, but this is the colder time of the year, but it's still a balmy 30 or thereabouts, so it's still all good and nice.
Oh yeah, I'd much rather be there than here, I must admit. So, okay, so for everybody, this is Brendan from Aeroband. Brendan's going to be going through really your journey, I take it, your journey from your scale up, the entrepreneurship, and offering some advice to us and our participants and our teams. Please have all of your questions ready at the end. And Brendan, I'm just going to hand it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah, much appreciated, and thanks for the invitation. I'm truly honored. So today what I'm going to do is I'm really going to try to focus on the audience of the folks who are building out the solutions. So basically, all of those teams out there who are making an entrepreneurial effort and trying to give some of my 30 years experience, and believe me, I made all the mistakes as well as doing some good stuff. So it's a long potted roll. It's never so simple. So that's my target audience. What I want to do is, first of all, introduce just my recent background to give some context, and then answer the question is, basically, why be an entrepreneur? And I'm also conscious that there's a Q&A session, which I think is a lot more beneficial than me droning on with a load of slides. So I'll try and get to the Q&A as quick as I can. And if there's any issues with sound or vision, please just put a hand up or send me a message. Okay. So let me just get this going. I need to, so you can see my slides okay, I take it?
Not at the moment. I can see your beautiful face, but not the slides.
Oh, okay. So let me just do a reshare again then.
Okay.
Okay, desktop 2.
There we go. We're live. Perfect.
Okay, we're all good. So basically, I am Brendan McKittrick. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Aeroband. And we were lucky enough to win the FinTech Startup of the Year last year in Malta. And just in a sort of a whistle-stop tour, I started my first company in 1996. So when you were playing the music earlier, about the 80s, that was a little bit down the road after I was born. And I sold my first company in the year 2000. And since then, I've worked in 24 countries. I love people, I love cultures, and I love technology. That's me in a nutshell. And I live in Dubai with my good wife, Sonia, who was originally from Pakistan. And we have 5 children scattered around the world. So why be an entrepreneur? So I'm going to give you a little bit of context around this. So I'm going to dip back just into my previous post. So my previous role, I was the CTIO of a company called Excelia, which was a company that we purchased for a sum greater than $500 million in our previous company, which was Mercator. And I became the global CT/CIO for the company. My wife actually calls me R2D2 from Star Wars because I change my title so often. So again, just to give you a little bit of a background here, the number of customers we had was 300 airlines and 100 shipping companies. And then we had about 30 data centers and offices scattered around the world. And we had 25 products, which incidentally included the global settlement system for airline ticketing. And that was about $200 billion worth of tickets that we settled every year. So I went to bed every night making sure all of this ran smoothly. Absolutely, aviation is my passion, so I was in a good job. But there was something bugged me about the whole industry as a whole. Basically, there was a lot of new technologies coming in on the fringes, but there was very little change in the core of the industry. And I also gave a presentation where I did a little bit of research, and lo and behold, the number of tickets booked in different types of technologies, it turned out that 44% of all the tickets booked in 2019 were booked through reservation systems that were invented and written through the 50s and 1960s. 37% 70s, 80s, 10% 80s, 90s, and a measly 9% actually ran through total software that was written since the year 2000. Now, if that were flipped the other way and we flew on aircraft with that technology, we'd probably end up on an aircraft looking something like this. And I don't think our user experience would be so good. So obviously something was not right. I wanted to change this. And to be very honest, in a large global corporate, which was, you know, I'm a bit of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I flipped between having my own entrepreneurial setups and also being, in this case, a global CTO. So I looked to blockchain to see if we could transform aviation from this 1960s highly embedded old systems type technology to something newer. So just to give everybody sort of a quick overview of, you know, where all the technologies play a role. This is a really good graph from Ernst & Young, I use sometimes. And basically it gives you the value of a technology divided over its point solution value, its enterprise-wide value, and its potential game changer. And you can see here in summary, blockchain, the blue line, is a very slow mover, but eventually it becomes the big game changer, followed closely by some other technologies such as artificial intelligence and cloud technology. Now we're probably in the 3 year. When it talks about the year of maturity, we're not talking about its origins. We're talking about the year of sort of widespread deployment. So we're probably in the 3rd year, or going into the 3rd year. So around the 5th year, this is really going to take off. So that was good motivation for me. So I looked at the industry as a whole. Again, I put on my entrepreneurial hat and said, if I'm going to walk away from this global role, what is my new company going to look like? And what am I going to do so different that it's going to dramatically disrupt the industry? So I looked at the whole structure of aviation, and I was able to see very simply that there's a huge role here for smart contracts across a myriad of different areas, which I won't cover now, but one of the fundamental changes would be, I want to reconnect the passenger to the airline. So today, there's so many intermediaries that the airlines make. Pre-COVID, they made about 3% profit per year over a revenue of about $1 trillion across the industry. And obviously during COVID, the worst days, there was a 97% reduction in revenue. So time is ripe for change. So my move ended up being quite prophetic and a good thing to do. So I just want to jump on. That was the context to give you where I jumped into, you know, a CTO role. Years ago, I had a couple of companies, I sold them, and I had this entrepreneurial bug that keeps coming back all the time. So I stepped away to create the new company Aeroband. And just to give you sort of a synopsis of what I've learned over the 3 years, and this is kind of a very quick whistle stop tour, conscious of the time. But the 3 biggest lessons or didactic experiences I had through my career are basically always follow your passion. So any of the folks listening right now, trying to find out what to do in life and where to go, follow your passion. It's always the direction where you'll find the most happiness. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's happiness that you're really pursuing. It might be the Lambo when you see folks on the crypto group chats when Lambo, but at the end of the day, what people are actually seeking is a sense of happiness. And the happiness comes with you following your passion as one of the sort of key drivers. The second thing that I would advocate very strongly is to be your truest self. And that's not an easy thing to do. Of course, in my previous job, to turn around and walk away from a job where, you know, I had 300 airlines on my books as customers, I was in a very comfortable position and I played a global role and I was invited to many presentations and my opinion counted in terms of, you know, influence and so forth. So to step away from all of that prestige and to pursue something that was closer to my heart wasn't necessarily an easy decision at the physical level, but at the spiritual level, it was the only decision. And the reason for that is, and I'll be very clear, is my biggest lesson that I've learned by being my truest self is that the pleasures in life feed your ego, but happiness feeds your soul. And most of us are actually in pursuit of happiness, although we don't realize it or it takes time to realize it. And the last point I would make, again, just to get right to the point, the world you live in, and this is especially important to entrepreneurs because it's going to be a lonely furrow at times, but the world that you live in is always a perfect vibrational match to your personality resonance. So that's kind of a long statement, but what does it mean? It means that as you progress through life and as you form opinions and as you form subconscious belief systems that are either given to you, or you endorse them, or you go into the world and you discover different belief systems, whatever it may be. You vibrate at that resonance of those set of beliefs and fundamentals, and you generally draw upon you the evidence to reinforce them. So we reinforce our own views most of the time. So you can put two people in a room, and one could be a pessimist and one could be an optimist, and both of them will show you all the evidence in their life to reinforce their fundamental views. So one of the things I would strongly recommend to folks out there who are entrepreneurs, or want to be entrepreneurs, or aspirational entrepreneurs, you know, seek your passion. You'll find out what that is, because it's the thing that makes you happy. It's the thing that doesn't feel like work. Be your truest self, and that's about being honorable to your truest self. It's the things that make you feel you're being honest to yourself and honest to the folks you work with. It involves empathy, love, energy, and truth. And basically then reaching a point where in your life you begin to discover what is the fundamental frequency you operate at. And that's one of the things I find, because when you're dealing with, you know, I could talk about investors all day. Investors invest in people. And when you're at your truest self, investors will pursue you, and they will find you, and they will invest in you. It's not just your idea that will carry you. Your idea has to be important, of course, but once you're your truest self, the ideas will flow. So rather than get hung up on the next big idea, and when Lambo, as they say in the crypto groups, get obsessed with yourself and being the truest version of yourself. The rest will follow. That would be my key and very whistle-stop tour opinion that I would share with any entrepreneurs. So that's basically it. I kept it deliberately short, Sarah, you know, right to the point. I was hoping to be a few question and answers here as well, to just probe some more value out of my cookie.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think I'm actually going to convert this into an audio session and keep it on my playlist for a big hype up as well, just for me to go to bed with and make me feel good about myself. So yeah, amazing. From your perspective, you brought this up, and this is a real key thing that I found as well. It can be lonely. Yeah, it can be lonely when you're trying to set up ideas or set up a business, etc. And you touched upon this. How important would you say about sort of bringing good people around you, and how would you go out and find these people to really kind of be a good positive impact, both professionally and personally?
Yeah, it's a really good point. When I started my second company, I sought out a bunch of folks that I knew were quite good. One of them was a guy I had gone to college with, and he was just an extraordinary individual. And strangely enough, I was able to entice him to join me at a lower salary than what he was earning. So that was my first lesson. You can get good people because they're not always driven just by the monetary return.
Yeah.
But after getting that guy, the CEO of the company, which was the largest Irish software company at the time, called me into his office. Now, I didn't know what was going to happen because I'd just taken his best engineer. But I left the room with a check for 750,000 Irish pounds, which is a little bit more than euros.
Wow.
He said, I'm going to invest in you because you've taken my best guy. Now, where he goes, he wouldn't be a fool. So I'm trusting his judgment. And we got on really well. But what happened was I discovered something really, you know, just around the loneliness and the furrow, was I got invited then to CEO forums with the top Irish CEOs in the country, plus me. So these guys were all on the NASDAQ and the LSE, and I was a 29-year-old who had just started a company. We were pre-revenue. We just were starting to build this hopefully amazing search engine. So I was sitting in these calls, and and we would meet at 7:30 in the morning in a nice hotel. And everybody, all the CEOs kept reiterating, you know, this is something you got to do on your own. This is something you've got to set out to do. And there's going to be hard days. There's going to be days of great loneliness where you're going to have to decide, is this for me? And one of the lessons there, just to tie it back into your question, was, yes, you need a really good team around you. Folks that will stay positive in the tough times, because you're going to have to put the brave face. You're going to have to find a positive spin on everything. You know, honesty is one thing, but perspective is another. So you got to be honest, but perspective means you take a dim view of it, or you take a positive view of it.
Yeah.
And that's what really differentiates great leaders, because great leaders have the ability to come into a room and say, you know, we've just lost the Western Front. How are we going to save the Eastern Front, you know, and be able to inspire people to get the best out of them. So one of the things I've always said is I don't hire people. I've always set out to inspire people. And if a person's inspired, they're probably the person you're looking for. And I've picked, you know, terribly bad choices over the years as well from time to time. So, you know, I'm no expert on this, but what I've tend to find now is I go with the energy of the people now more than the CV. It was the CV, you know, 30, 20 years ago. Now it's really energy, and I don't care if you don't have the skill set. You'll get the skill set, you know.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's really key, because especially with hackathons like what we're doing here, it is all about the teams. It's about the team dynamic. It's about really, you know, at different times during, I know this is kind of a really condensed version of it, but ultimately a hackathon is equivalent of doing 3 months worth of work in 3 days. And you're thrown in with people that you may not have met before. And it's about building people up. It's about really sort of lifting them up when everyone's tired, ratty at a long day, etc. And that's the key thing. And teamwork, from our perspective, has really made a difference to winning. The winners from our previous hackathons. It's because they've all got on well, or they've really helped each other. And this is where, from us, we do want to try and encourage that cross-border collaboration. We really do want to encourage, you know, multi-skilled and multi-level of skill as well, because you have a bigger perspective on this. So in terms of the pitch side of things, because I know that from some of the calls that I've had this morning with the one-to-one teams, some of these have been going through about, you know, how to present to investors. I know you said it's about being your true self, which is what they're going through at the moment, is the ideation stage. But ultimately, that's great. But how do we present that to people to really buy into you? Do you think that just comes from passion, or is there a trick that we
it's a fair question, because obviously being your truest self, you can walk in and do a dance or do a ballet or something, and this is my truest self. The truest self is the well you draw from. So you drop your bucket into that deep well of your selfness, and you take from that. And by drawing from that, what you can do is show your belief in your own mission. So when folks are sitting across the table, they're figuring out, can you deliver? Are you the right guy? There is all the metrics. And I've seen from the first investment I got back in '99 to the most recent investment, I'm even in an investment conversation next week.
Yeah.
The metrics have changed immensely, because what's happened is, back in the day was, you know, it was very inspirational. There was very few tools. Nowadays, there's a lot of tools and measurement metrics. And I think a lot of companies may get lost between the cracks a little bit. But in terms of actually translating that energy over, you've got to be able to translate from your energy to that investor to say, what do I need from you? When do I need it, in tranches or whatever? What do you get for that? And when do you get your return? So you've got to be able to communicate and empathize with them and say, put yourself in their shoes. You're the investor. Now, in the last company I mentioned, we bought a few startups who were starting to mature, and I was part of that process. So I sat on the other side of the table, and you know, nobody wants to make mistakes, and there's all this mechanics, and you know, some people didn't fit the box, but I just knew they want to be good companies. So you've got to be able to sell across your idea. You've got to be able to communicate very clearly in a very short space of time and engage, and that's where your human skills come in, your communication. And that's why empathy is important, because empathy allows you to connect. It's not just about being the nice guy, but being liked is not a bad thing too, as long as you're delivering on the other tenets as well. So yeah, the engagement has to be around some sort of structure. And as I said, a lot of the companies now have amazing decks. And one thing I would suggest is that if you're in an area where you're doing something quite disruptive or interesting, try and pull in a few gray-haired folks who have been around the block and have seen all this stuff fail over the years and can tell you why. You know, I just showed you 44% of tickets being booked on technology from 50. Why hasn't that been broken? Now I have I could obviously have a total call about that. But the point being, there's an intransiency there that if I wasn't aware of that, an investor might be aware of it and say, this kid thinks he's going to do, you know, if someone comes in with a startup. So, you know, bang shoulders with the folks who've been there, done that, have the scars. It does no harm to learn from them, even though they might not be as technically literate as you might be, you know.
Yeah. So what would be the, I know you have already touched on this, but what would be, you said that you've been on the other side of the table with when people have been pitching you and for investments. If you could sort of summarize with 3 points, I'll stop talking shortly, by the way, as well. I'll let other people ask some questions. It's as if it's just me and you talking. It's a private chat. So I'll let everyone else ask questions second. But what would be the 3 things, if you could actually sort of pinpoint it, what would be the 3 things that they would, that you look for? If you said, right, these are the benchmarks, this is what we look for, have you hit the nail on the head with these 3 points?
I could probably give you 3 from a classic investor point of view, but I'll give you 3 from my own personal point of view.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So the first thing I do is, you usually get pre-decks and stuff like that. I get a sense of excitement. You know, it's amazing how many people come in and they're pitching to be purchased, you know, to become part of our group in the previous job. They should be excited. This should be, you know, the best moment of their life, and you know, they should blow us away with this sort of sonic boom when they come into the room. Like, you know, be happy. This is a good moment. So that's always a thing for me, is a great positive energy. Folks I can work with, and could say, you know what, we could be on the ground and we'd still have a laugh and get off the ground and we'd go again with these folks. So first off would be the, you know, high positive energy. I don't mean hyper, but you know, you don't have to drink 10 cups of coffee, but just come in and be you and be positive about where you're going. And the second thing is, again, I'll shift away from the human side because I focus maybe a bit too much on that, and people listening probably want to hear a bit more concrete. One thing is, you can tell whether a project is really disruptive and it's got that 10x feel about it. You know that the people know what they're talking about and they get to the point very quickly, but they bring you along without losing you. So they don't ram a PhD down your neck and sort of, you know, swamp you with knowledge. Look how intelligent I am. But they're able to take a complex problem and simplify it. That would be the second thing. So good energy, complex problem, simplify it. I buy into the whole idea. It's a kind of a 10x disruptor or a 10x kind of revenue generator. And the last one then is, of course, the finances. Is it a financially viable solution? And that doesn't mean it has to tear the world apart and eat up all the trees and, you know, and be a resource hungry. It could be a social change which causes a cascade of positivity in a community through, you know, microfinancing or a special wallet for folks who don't have, you know, the unbanked and things like that. So there's some really good ones like that. So that would be the 3 I would, for me personally.
Amazing. That's perfect. Does anybody have any questions? I think, Lindell, you had something on Slack. Did something come through? I think you messaged.
Yeah, Ben messaged me on Slack. Really weirdly, Brendan, talking about what you just touched on. Obviously, blockchain and AI, we are dealing with some of the more complex stuff out when it comes to technology. Ben's question is, when you're translating something to layman's terms, when you're describing a smart contract type of blockchain, what are your tips for conveying that in a great way, in a way that keeps up that passion without killing it by oversimplifying it?
Yeah, so it depends. Every situation is different, but maybe if I gave you one example, Lyndall might explain. I sat with a guy who said, look, and he was the bagman into a big investor, and I wanted to meet the investor, and he said, look, nobody gets to meet this investor, he's terribly busy, blah, blah, blah. And he said, and by the way, you know, he probably doesn't understand blockchain, it's quite complex. I said, if I can explain blockchain in 60 seconds to you, do I get a meeting? And he says, I'm totally technology agnostic, you know. And I said, but do I have a deal? He said, yes. So I said, who's your favorite team? He said, Liverpool. Okay. So we picked Liverpool and Man United. And I said, let's picture a stadium where every person, the 50,000 people who walk into that stadium, are given a notebook and a pen, right? So they all walk into a stadium and they're given a notebook and a pen, and they're told, when there's a score, you write down the score, you write down the time, and you write down who scored it, which team against which team. And he says, okay. And I said, when everybody's leaving that stadium, so there's a goal scored in the last 90 seconds of the game, that's it. And I said, who's your favorite player? And he said, mention someone from Liverpool. Sarah, are you a Liverpool fan?
Gerrard, little Gerrard. My son plays football.
Gerrard, back in the day.
Stevie G.
Right, back in the day, Gerrard scored the goal, right? So this is a little bit late. So everybody's leaving the stadium. And as they all leave the stadium, they're polled and they're asked, what was the score, who scored it, and what minute. And 95% of the people said Liverpool 1, Manchester United 0, and Gerrard scored it in the 89 minute or 88 minute. And the other 5% were broke up with people who said, well, Manchester United won, you know, they were bad actors. The others were saying, I don't know, I was asleep, so they were offline. So basically what you're looking for is this mass consensus that gives you a truth that can't be, you know, overturned unless you have a lot of bad actors. And I said, unless 50% of people in the stadium said, you know, 51% said, let's say Manchester United won, which is quite difficult with 50,000 people there and too many good actors who follow Liverpool. So anyway, I got this in 60 seconds. He said, I get it. So that little notebook is what? And I said, that's your ledger. And everybody has the same information on the ledger by and large. But you have a few bad actors that might say something different. So basically, that was the way I did it in that situation. But every situation is different. Sometimes you go in and I've been in rooms where you've got, you know, top techie guys who just want to drill down into the code. And, you know, I don't want to live there. I want to keep the vision of what we're trying to do as a business and an industry. And you just have to be able to manage the two extremes. Yeah,
cool. I think, Ange, you've got a question for us. Feel free to unmic and ask the question.
Yeah, hi, how are you?
Yeah, all good, thank you.
Great. So, hi, Brendan.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, happy Diwali to you too. So, I have a question. So, as an entrepreneur, right? What's your opinion on building a community around your product? You know, like, what do you think about that?
That's an amazing question because that's one of the things we're working on at the moment, Ange.
Okay.
And it's quite a complex thing. It's not as simple as it sounds. So
right.
I came from a previous job where I had almost every airline in the world worth of note in my customer community. So that was kind of, you woke up every morning and you had the pond and all the fish were in it, right? So then you start off a new company, you've got 0 customers and you're going to have to build that community. And because you're selling a community type solution like blockchain, you're going to have to reach that critical mass. And you're going to have to figure out how to get there where you don't penalize the early adopters, you reward the early adopters. So that's a really, really, really good question for blockchain because it's one of the hardest things to do. So what we did was we have a system called ID tree, which is basically industry design tree. We get 3 airlines or 2 airlines and an airport or 3 airports or at least a lessor and a legal house and an airline, whatever. We get 3 folks who are key stakeholders because we're looking at different apps. And they sign up to become the ID3 model to start that particular app. And what they become is they also become stakeholders in the revenue. Now, they don't necessarily have to pay for the app starting off. What they do is they just participate and they give up their time. So we make it easy for them to get involved. So it's kind of like, what have I got to lose? So I use the contacts of the folks I know. And we typically try to go for a small airline, a middle airline, and a big airline. And we try to go for airlines on 3 different continents, right? So we've just started that process as we speak. So it's a very timely question. So for a product that we're looking at the moment, we think we have the first 3 folks. I can't announce them yet because they haven't signed off. But basically, we're going to get those 3 to become our early adopters. So they are going to give us a half a day every month to make sure we're building something that's fit for purpose. Now, if they use the product, they also get to share on the revenue. That's one side. And the second side, Ange, is we're going to give the Aeroblock, the DLT that we're building agnostically across all the current blockchains, we're going to give that back to the industry under a governance program. We don't keep that. That becomes the digital asset of the commons. And we think that's an amazing way to do it. We give that back. We don't own that. So that serves a purpose and serves the community rather than another middleman that just screws everybody in the middle. This is going to be a service with a very small fee which goes into maintaining it, and nobody profits off it, but the community uses it. So thanks for a beautiful question. Thanks.
Yeah, amazing. And Haroon, I think you asked a question too.
Sorry?
Did you ask a question?
Haroon, I think there's written one in the chat. Sarah.
Okay.
Sorry, I did ask a question in the chat. Hiya, it was a great talk. Thanks for giving it. It's very interesting to see. So my question was, so my company, we're looking to start to raise, and just wanted to know what kind of objectives or things should we have done just before we start raising?
Let me tell you what you shouldn't have, right? So don't go in and say, if we get 1% of the Chinese market, we're billionaires, right? Everybody does that, right? It's a very easy thing to do. It shows that you don't understand how difficult it is to get market share. So don't do that. Go in with things that you think are realistic. I prefer when people bare their soul and say, this is what I can and can't do, because then you know you can work with them. So be honest, be accountable, but be positive, give a positive spin on it. So the objectives I would do is do really good market research to say, how big is the market, right? How much, like people often say to me, what do you put in for you're aware, Haroon, of the TAM, the SAM and the SOM, right? So I have
no business experience.
So this is really important for an investor. So say the TAM is the target applicable market, right? And basically the SAM and the SOM is, the SAM is kind of like the amount of the market that's applicable to you, right? And the SOM then is the obtainable market, the piece that you can actually deliver on. So even though half the market might be suitable for your product, maybe only 10% is what you can handle. And the way I explain that to folks is the TAM is the hotel, the SAM is the buffet, and the SOM is the size of your stomach. How much can you eat, And if you remember that in your head, it's probably an easy way. So when you go in and say the SAM is $1 billion a year, but you could say that the SOM, the obtainable market, is only 10 million, because I can only roll out 10 million of kit in the first year. So be realistic about that and have those figures. Also have a look at your competitors very carefully, because you're going to have to displace them. You're going to have to steal their customers. And are they delivering a good service? Because if they are, it's going to be very difficult to take their customers. So what's the cost of taking a customer away? Now, if you're doing something disruptive, that's great, because maybe you're going to do it so different and so much cheaper that they'll say, hey, this is great. So look at cases where they succeeded. And often, like for everyone that succeeds, there's probably 10 or 20 that went before them who were just as good, and the timing was wrong. So the third thing I'd say is timing. Make sure your timing is really sweet and you have enough money to last the conversations you're having with these guys. Because it could take up to 6 months to get investment. Sometimes it happens in 6 days, we all wish, but it can take up many months. So make sure you have enough oxygen to last that conversation as well. Haroon.
Okay, thank you very much.
Cool, you're amazing, welcome. Nice. And Simone, you're more than welcome to bring up the question as well. Would you like to join us?
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Hi, Simone.
So my question is, in the new markets, we already know that we have to reduce the CO2, sorry, in Dutch.
Ik spreek een klein beetje Vlaams, so understand.
Oh my word, so impressive! Yeah!
European people!
Ik woon in Leuven in België voor 2 jaar.
Oh, top. So CO2, that's the new market also, and market and sustainability. How can you combine that? So that's my question. So
it's a fascinating area. One of the jobs I worked in maybe I'm trying to add up, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I worked with a company, a friend of mine, who had a HALE. It's a high altitude, long endurance aircraft. So it's solar powered and it loiters in the stratosphere for 6 months. So it goes up with a balloon and it stays up there. And it's basically a relay. It was bought by Facebook, right? So
I've heard of it. Was it in Africa?
It was called Ascenta, right?
And was it in Africa?
No, that was the Google Loons.
Oh.
Google put up the balloons and they call them the Loons. And the idea was to bring, the Loons of course are global because they blow around the place. But Facebook were on a mission to bring internet to Africa. But what they're doing now is putting a cable around Africa. But what it opened my eyes to was the power sort of ratio that was coming into aviation. So as a kid, I tried to make helicopters out of, lollipop sticks and little motors. The batteries were always too heavy, so I had these little fans that never took off. So Those little fans that never took off were too heavy because of the batteries. So now we have lighter batteries. So what you have is you have a couple of companies. There's one in the UK at the moment. The name escapes me. I'm watching them very carefully, but they're starting to build these small aircraft for light hops, you know, for short hops. And to your question about CO2, you can keep changing the fuel, but with so many aircraft in the air, it's just going to be, you know, once there's any pollution at all, it's multiplied by 28,000 aircraft, and there's going to be 50,000 aircraft, you know, maybe in 20 years' time. So there's always going to be some level of pollution from aviation if they continue with the same sort of carbon burning, no matter how clean the fuel gets. So I think the future may just be electric. And by the way, aviation is only about 5% of it's mostly cars that cause the CO2. Just to put a little plug in for aviation. but the electrical aircraft are getting stronger and can go further and longer and so forth. And the funny thing is, they were betting, all the electric folks were betting on smaller aircraft, flying from more regional areas, so more point to point where you want to go to. So you don't have to drive all the way into Heathrow or Charles de Gaulle or Schiphol or whatever. You will just go to your local little airfield, and these things are probably VTOL, so they'll probably take off up and down. Or they'll have short runways, and they're going to start competing with the flying taxis as well, because the taxis will be like, you know, 4 people going from A to B. And
cars who fly?
Yeah, in Dubai, they're not too far away.
God. Yeah, I'm a little bit too old for that.
Yeah, they've got flying policemen they've got motorbikes that can take off. They've got VTOL built into them.
So we get a whole nother world for the future of children.
So, and this is my first chance to mention COVID. I try to avoid it, but with COVID, what's happened now is aviation has collapsed. But with the collapse comes opportunity to reinvent.
I agree.
And now people are saying, you know, I'll pay a little bit more to be safer. I don't want to be on a big A380. And, you know, airlines are saying, I'm not going to fill my A380 anyway. So everything's getting smaller, more medium sized. And the push at the moment is, you know, the smaller sized Airbus, the smaller sized Embraer, the smaller sized Boeing. They're looking at a more compact aircraft. And people are flying, you know, necessary distance as opposed to, let's go to Australia, let's give that a kick for 2 years. Maybe Australia's a bit far if you're in Europe, or Europe's a bit far if you're in Australia. Although these are brilliant destinations and all of that, but business travel as well. People are zooming instead of flying. And
so that's the good point out of the COVID. And you think that in the future, we are less flying, or if we fly, it's electric, I think.
I think we fly in smaller aircraft, and we go smaller distance more frequently. That's what I'm not sure about the long haul before. But the one thing is sure, that CO2 is going to be reduced dramatically even without the electric aircraft. And the electric aircraft will come into their own once the cost ratio, the cost benefit ratio, starts to equal the conventional aircraft.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any more questions for us? We seem to be taking up all of your time. We could be talking to you for hours, Brendan, I think.
I could talk to you guys for hours. I really enjoy it.
Sorry, Lindell, was there another question?
Yeah, but it's from me, unfortunately. Sorry.
I know there's nothing unfortunate about you, Lindell. Nothing unfortunate.
It's a question about electric planes, which is actually really nothing to do with it. But I just when you were talking about electric planes, and you know, you have your return on investment increasing, it also, after you have enough parts, enough people producing enough parts for electric planes, economies of scale kick in. So a carrier, you know, like Boeing, can essentially control the price of that. But when it comes to transport, I think with longer range stuff, isn't it more about propulsion? Because once you're in the stratosphere, correct me if I'm wrong, it's getting an aeroplane off the ground. Because once you're high, the higher you go, the less air resistance, which therefore the further you can glide with less fuel. Was that what your friend was doing with the solar plane? I missed that part.
So not well, he was trying to create a buoyant presence that could hold sort of internet routers.
Okay, sure. Sorry, excuse me.
This area of high bandwidth coverage. So it came from a military background, basically, where they would have put up drones of some description, but a lot of the drones are not, all the sort of modern military drones are fueled in some way. So this was purely solar powered. So it would stay up there for 6 months. It wouldn't run out of power. The only time it would need to come down would be for maintenance. Yeah, so there's the high altitude theory that if you put the aircraft high enough, you know, it can come down, say in New York, London, New York in 2 hours and supersonic, because of the lack of resistance and all of that to, you know, air and things like that. I'm not an expert in that, but I do know what, in principle, what you're saying is true. And again, it's a cost thing. So the 2 hour sort of London, New York sort of magic thing that the Concorde gave us was an expensive luxury that people needed. So it was a premium product.
We all need expensive luxuries. That's what we all need.
Yeah, and burn up half the planet along the way.
I know.
But you know, the selling point of that was not that it was economic or anything like that. It was just you got your 2 hour trip, you know, and you were able to go shopping and come home. It was shorter than a trip into London, maybe from certain places. So the principle that you could have flight paths that would be very quick and supersonic and over the poles, that kind of stuff is a good principle, and it definitely is possible. And if you look at the aircraft that they're developing in the different houses, they have this flying wing concept, you know, appearing everywhere. And for most of them, they're electric. So I think the emphasis has probably shifted away from how quick, it's probably how green, because the appetite is not for, you know, to burn up huge amounts of fuel. So I think it's probably taken a little bit of a backseat. But you're right, it's the takeoff and landing the takeoff is the big consumer of energy. Landing, of course, is the opposite. But the consumer of human attention is actually, there's about 7 minutes real flying on a transatlantic flight, you know, the takeoff and landing. The rest is all automatic, believe it or not. So what you might see is autonomous aircraft in the future, which are guided in by beacons and stuff like that at airports. So again, electric, speed will sort of come in behind the sort of greenness and the efficiencies and so forth. But it will become important once there's a level playing pitch on the greenness. And at that stage, I think you're right, you know, those ultrasonic, high altitude, stratospheric type aircraft. But it does introduce a lot of other stuff around radiation and things like that we haven't figured out.
Yeah.
Just on that, I'm gonna put a question out to everybody and just put a thumbs up or a thumbs down. How many of you would be willing to go on the first autonomous flight out there? How many of you would be brave enough to do that? Anybody coming through? Because I don't know if I would. Oh, we've got some brave ones. Yeah, that's going to be crazy. Like autonomous shipping's fine, although, you know, it's very difficult to steer a huge vessel out of the way, but at least you can jump overboard quick enough, I think. But a flight, that's going to be quite crazy. But thank you very much, Brendan. If anybody has any more questions, please let us know now. If not, let's get back. Have we?
Yes, I have one question. People said they take a time to take off and landing. So what do you think about the drones? The drones can be the future.
Passenger drones?
If you can see, many people, because of the COVID, are using drones to deliver foods and deliver medicine. So can be the drone of the future, like carrying people from one place to another.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's going to be a convergence, Jigger, because you've a lot of technologies coming in on the same space. So you've got big drones, which are going to compete with flying taxis, and smaller electrical aircraft are kind of all falling into common space, because one of the aircraft manufacturers I was talking to, it's a UK-based one, the one that I can't remember. They've got a great design, but they're also looking at cargo, so that it could be dedicated to cargo, and it also eventually could be autonomous. So it would fly itself. So they probably would fly the cargo itself, but not the people. People like to have a person a pilot in the aircraft. The randomness of aerospace, and of course, all of this again has to be approved by EASA and FAA. So a lot of type certification and approvals that, you know, these things have to go through. I know the iPad had to go through massive approvals just to be used on, you know, in the cockpit. So it's not as simple as it sounds, but it's probably a lot safer than it sounds as well. But what you're talking about is drones. I've seen some pretty impressive drones that can carry people. So is it an aircraft? Is it an autonomous aircraft, or is it a drone? It looks like a drone, but it's, I suppose they're all aircraft. They're all aviation objects.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
So yes.
Brilliant. Cool. All right. Thank you very much. So can I ask this? We do try and do this for everyone. Can everyone put on their cameras for us, please? Yes. And can everyone take off their mics? And can we give Brendan a round of applause? Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy your afternoon. Really great pleasure to have you here. Thanks, Brendan.